Right, boys, we're going a bit more high tech this time. So this is some more information to do with the indirect statements, but we're focusing on infinitives today. Now, last lesson, I talked a lot about how the indirect statement is made up of an accusative and an infinitive. So obviously infinitives are a big deal. And I also briefly mentioned how we'd only met present infinitives. And we haven't really talked about the tense of infinitives before because we've just always called them the infinitives. But infinitives do have tenses. Now, the key ones that we know, obviously, are these guys here. And they are present active infinitives. So if your infinitives end in re, we know we translate them as to carry or to drag. Okay, just think about that. There's no tense change there, so it's just present tense. I want to carry the wine. That's all happening in the present tense. I want to drag the horse. It's all happening present tense, and it's also active because it's being done. It isn't I want to be carried. It's not passive. Okay. However, these ones here are the passives, but they are still present tense. So for example, I want to be carried. It's happening right now. The horse wants to be dragged. It's happening right now. The difference is that it's passive rather than active. So the thing is happening to the person rather than that they are doing it. And as we know, the active ones end in re, but the passive ones end in either ri or with a few, they end in just the letter I, like this one here, trahi, to be dragged. So today we're going to focus on the perfect infinitive. Now don't worry about passive for now. We're just focusing on an infinitive that's active. So we are doing this action, except it's not happening right now. It's happening in the perfect tense. So this, firstly, is what the perfect infinitive looks like. So porta visse, and for drag, trax isse. Now the way we translate this is to have carried and to have dragged. So very straightforward translation of the perfect infinitive, to have done something, rather than the present one, which is just to do something. And the other easy thing about it is that the perfect active infinitive always ends in these four letters, isse. So if you take a look at page 92 in the textbook, at the bottom in blue, there is a list of various infinitives. So you've also got monuisse, to have warned. You've got audivisse, to have heard. And you've got capisse, to have captured. So dead easy because they all end in isse. If you see an isse, you translate it as to have done something. Now at the top of page 93, there are some irregulars. Okay, so these look like the following. Fuisse, to have been. Potuisse, to have been able. And ivisse, to have gone. Coepisse, to have begun. Okay. Now, they are irregular because their stems are a bit strange, but if you look at the endings, again, the isse rule still stands. So let's make some sort of neat note about this. Okay, boys, so your title is going to be perfect infinitive. I want you to write those three different types of infinitive across the top so that you've got them all there in the same place. And then just add this little note. The perfect active infinitive always ends in isse and is translated as to have something. I would suggest putting some of the irregulars in there. So, fuisse, to have been. Ivisse, certainly, to have gone, because that's weird. And I think the others are pretty straightforward. Okay, so next we've got to talk about what this has got to do with the indirect statement, because obviously as an infinitive, this can be used as part of the accusative and infinitive construction, or as we've called it, the indirect statement. So let's see how that will work. Okay, so underneath your notes, I want you to write out this sentence, put the little subheading indirect statement, nuntius dicit hostes fugisse. So the first thing we notice here is obviously that fugisse is a perfect infinitive. So let's think about how to translate it. The beginning's very straightforward. So the messenger, and dicit is just present tense, so says. Okay, now the rest of this sentence literally says the enemy to have fled, because that's how you translate a perfect infinitive. But we're not going to say the messenger says the enemy to have fled, because that makes absolutely no sense. So instead, we're going to do what we always do with an indirect statement. We're going to insert a that. So the messenger says that. Then translate your accusative, which here is hostes, so the enemy. And then, just like you did with the present infinitive, translate the perfect infinitive as a normal verb. But this time, instead of it being in the present tense, it's going to be in the perfect tense, so that the enemy have fled. The messenger says that the enemy have fled. Simple. Let's do another example. Okay, have a look at this sentence. So obviously, we've got our perfect infinitive here. Let's translate it. The boys understand that the accusative soldiers, vicisse is a normal verb, have won. Okay, so just to make it even more complicated now, just if you glance at these two sentences that we've done here, both these verbs at the start are present tense verbs. Okay, so the messenger says, the boys understand. Now something strange happens when that verb goes into the perfect tense, which we talked about in our last lesson. So have a think about what that might be while I write out an example sentence here. So let's say, in fact, we'll just take that one, put it in the perfect tense. Nuntius dicit hostes fugisse. Okay, so this is perfect tense here, but this is also perfect tense. So it starts off very straightforward. The messenger said that the enemy. All very simple so far. You've just changed says to said. However, I mentioned last lesson how if this verb is perfect tense, then this infinitive needs to go back a tense. Now before, when this was a present infinitive, that meant it just went back into the imperfect. But this time, it's already a perfect infinitive. So what tense is one further back from the perfect? Well, it's the pluperfect. So the messenger said that the enemy had fled. But that will only happen if this verb is perfect and this infinitive is perfect. Okay, boys, so make sure you've got those 3 example sentences with their translations in your books, and then add this bit of information at the end just to remind yourselves how that works. So if the original verb is in the perfect tense and the infinitive is perfect, then it must jump back a tense in translation to the pluperfect. So it's almost like you've got 2 perfect tenses added together makes not just a perfect, it makes a plus perfect, a pluperfect. Okay, on page 93, I would now like you to complete exercise 921. So there's 5 sentences there. And then I want you to turn over the page and just have a little look at page 94. Now I know this is tedious, but I want you to write out all those verbs which introduce an indirect statement, because sometimes indirect statements are quite tricky to spot. So if you write out that list, then whenever you see any of those verbs, you'll think, right, I know that dico, for example, often introduces an indirect statement, or I know that invenio often introduces an indirect statement. Okay, so write out all those words and then have a go at exercise 922, which is at the bottom of page 94. So 2 exercises to do there. Any questions, let me know.